Hello, everybody. Hope you're having a great day. So thanks again for attending and being with us today. My name is Lindsay Keith. I'm one of the organizers for today's webinar. There's a couple items I want to cover before we get started. First, this webinar is being recorded and you will all receive the recording. Secondly, everyone is in listen-only mode, but we still want you to be interactive with us. So if you do have any questions, please type those in. And you can find the questions panel on the GoToWebinar interface. So, okay, let's get started. Here is just a couple slides of what we're going to go over today. So here's part 1 of our agenda. Then we'll move into part 2, and then we'll finish up here with part 3. So one of the biggest mindset challenges athletes face is when they're injured or sick, particularly when they can't play their sport for a long time. So today, Jim and Phil are going to explore how champions mentally approach their recovery. But first, let me tell you a little bit about our presenters. So I'd like to introduce Jim AFREMOW. Jim has served as a sports psychology specialist at Arizona State University, the peak performance coordinator for the San Francisco Giants, and a mental game coach to scores of Olympic gold medalists and professional athletes across all sports. Next, we have Phil White, who has written human performance books with the likes of Dr. Kelly Starrett, Andy Galpin, and Sue Falsone. He also collaborates with Nick Gill from the New Zealand All Blacks and Tim DeFrancesco, who was the strength and conditioning coach for the Lakers. So now I'm going to turn it over to Phil to get us started. There you go, Phil.
Thanks, Lindsay. Thank you, Jim, and thanks to all the coaches, athletes, and others who've joined us today. As Lindsay rightly said, staying positive and proactive when you're hurt or ill is always a challenge. And when they're on the sidelines, many athletes can start to feel disconnected from their teammates, coaches, and the sport they love. And for coaches, it can be hard to keep the injured athlete engaged. So, Jim, can you start by telling us a little bit more about how reframing can help with injury and illness and the recovery from either?
Sure thing, Phil, but let me start off by thanking you, Lindsay, and everyone who has joined us today. When you get injured or ill, it can really feel like the roof has caved in on you, and suddenly you can't practice or play, you're unable to work toward your goals, and your daily routine is turned upside down. But while I think that it's healthy to initially acknowledge and definitely validate feeling angry, frustrated, sad, or upset, then you really need to start reframing your sickness or your injury as a golden opportunity. And that's what we're going to talk a lot about today. Anyone can have a great attitude when everything is going well, but it's when adversity strikes that you have the chance to show your true grit and determination, your mental toughness, and tap into the power of purpose that will drive you to be your best. And sure, you didn't want to be hurt or ill, but it happened nonetheless. Now it's up to you what comes next. And so are you going to use the situation to get one day better every day, or are you going to let the situation use you? And so in the introduction of my book, The Champion's Comeback, I feature the quote, "Your setback is the platform for your comeback." Or as I often like to tell athletes I work with, it's time to love your comeback more than you hate the setback.
Great stuff, Jim. Thank you. We can probably all think of a good athlete recovery story where somebody used their injury rather than, as you said, letting it use them. But is there a particular comeback story that stands out to you?
Well, there's definitely an amazing story. There's a lot of newer examples, but one of my favorite comeback stories is about the Hungarian athlete Karoli Takas. And he earned a spot on the national shooting team for Hungary back in 1938. And, when he was at Army training camp. And, a terrible, awful, horrible thing happened. A hand grenade exploded and destroyed his dominant hand at the time. And, most athletes would, of course, said, my career is over. But he learned how to shoot with his other hand. And in the next national championship, his peers thanked him for showing up at the event to cheer them on. And he said, look, I'm not here to watch, I'm here to compete. And he proved it by winning the event. So after World War II was over, Karolyi became the first person to win gold in 25-meter pistol shooting at back-to-back Olympic Games. And then in 1948 at the London Olympics, the reigning world champion from Argentina saw Karolyi's injured hand and asked him what he was even doing there. And he replied, I'm here to learn. And after Karolyi beat him to the top of the podium, his rival came up to him and said, you've learned enough. And Karolyi later said, winning a gold medal in shooting is less about the hand and more about the mind. And what just a great story about, just meeting adversity and finding a way to, find a workaround and then win an Olympic gold with his other hand. And, and as we always say, the mind is the athlete, and Karolyi did a really good job for us in terms of proving that. So how about for you, Phil? Do you have a favorite recovery story?
Yeah, I do, Jim. I think you might be able to guess this one as, we were both big track fans growing up. But I really love the story about how Ed Moses became the most dominant hurdler of all time. And he was already very fast, of course, over both the 400 flat and the 400 hurdles in the mid to late 70s. But he kept getting hurt. And at one point he was really eager to get back to training, but couldn't push off his usual back leg after injuring his hamstring again during his senior year at Morehouse College. And he thought to himself, well, what if I go ahead and change my lead leg? And so what seemed like a pretty ambitious experiment at the time really proved to be an unexpected game changer for him. And starting in 1977, he went on a winning streak that lasted for 10 years and 122 consecutive races. And during that time, he won 2 Olympic golds, 2 World Championship golds, and broke the world record in the 400 hurdles 4 times. And asked later to explain that decade of dominance, Ed Moses said, I prepared myself better than everyone else on a daily basis. And that included the period when he was injured and, like the shooter you mentioned, was forced to find a workaround and was actually able to not only come back strong, but come back stronger.
Yeah, it's a great story.
Oh, thanks. Jim, are there any kind of takeaways from both of those comeback stories, do you think, in terms of just reframing injury and illness as an opportunity, maybe, rather than as a crushing setback?
Yeah, absolutely, Phil. I think both of these stories show that there are 2 paths you can take if injury or illness takes you out of your sport. And so you want to think about, if you do get injured, how you'll look back on this time in, let's say, 10 years. Do you want to regret that you wasted this opportunity? Or, like Karolyi Takash or Ed Moses, really be proud that you made the most of your chance to work on the other areas of your game and, really flex your talents in other areas of your life and then come back even stronger in your sport. So it's really important to understand that we always have a choice and that you as the athlete are the chooser.
I love that. Thank you, Jim. So to set the scene for a bit more of a deep dive into this topic, could you tell us a bit more about the prevalence of injury among athletes and the costs associated with players getting hurt?
Absolutely. When you get injured, as most of us have been injured, in one way or another, just playing sports throughout life or, just by accident, it could feel intensely personal, like the universe has singled you out specifically. But in reality, you're never alone in injury because everyone who plays has been, is, or will be hurt at one point or another. And I always like to share this story that the first NFL player I worked with, and this was many years ago, I was just asking about what was going on and how he was doing. And, one of the questions was, are you dealing with any injuries at this time? And he had a big laugh about it. And I said, what's so funny? And he said, man, at this level, we're always banged up in some way. No one is ever 100%. And, that really hit home for me that, just that injuries are just part of the game, as we all know, but that, that we're always dealing with something, even if it's not a moderate or major injury. And this isn't just the case in a high contact sport like football either. According to a 4-year study of athletes in all sports, there are an average of 8.6 million sports injuries in the US annually. The analyst group Forrester reported that there are over 2.8 million ER visits each year. And among high school and college athletes alone, injury-related costs are more than $20 billion. And a third of professional athlete salaries are even lost to injury. And these are just those injuries and hospital visits that are reported. So the real numbers are probably far greater.
Those are some pretty big numbers there, Jim. What are some of the most common injuries according to that study?
Well, according to that 4-year study, Phil, the top 7 acute and chronic injuries across all sports are, and as you can see on the slide, and maybe even think about some that you've dealt with, in terms of who's listening. Ankle sprain, that's a big one. Groin pull, hamstring strain, that's not fun. Shin splints, those hurt. ACL tear, and as we've talked about, Phil, I've worked with a lot of athletes that have had multiple ACL tears, and unfortunately, I even worked with a women's college soccer player that had 3 career ACL injuries. Patellofemoral syndrome, and then tennis elbow, which is pretty common. And so that's just a list of just some common ones, but we could pretty much get hurt anywhere on the body, as we all know.
For sure. Well, that's a pretty good look at some of the physical ramifications of injury, Jim. What about some of the mindset challenges that athletes face when they're out sick or hurt?
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked that, Phil, because while athletes have, athletic trainers, doctors, physical therapists, and other medical staff who can help them come back physically, the mental side of the recovery is often overlooked or not given the full attention it deserves, even though it can be just as difficult, if not way more difficult, than dealing with the physical side. And some of the mindset challenges athletes face when they're on the sidelines include separation from their teammates and coaches, withdraw from their sport, and having their goals deferred. They can also feel powerless and out of control and start to give into negative self-talk, which can really spiral into mental health issues like chronic anxiety and depression. And because they lose their main outlet, they can also get angry and frustrated. And injury and illness can also be an insult to their identity and a challenge to their sense of self-worth. And when you're in physical and emotional pain, it's all too easy to start letting negative thoughts ruminate in your head over and over. And then you start really feeding that bad wolf that's inside of all of us.
Oh, good point, Jim. Thank you. And when we were planning the 12 modules of the Champion's Mind course, injury was certainly one of the first topics you came up with. And soon enough, you'd kind of written 5 audios for athletes and their coaches to use in this area. So could you briefly walk us through each one and maybe give us a few takeaway exercises?
Sure thing, Phil. What I tried to do is walk athletes and coaches through the full recovery journey from the time of injury until return to play. Medical staff always come up with a timeline to get you back on the field physically, and I think it's really important to have a mental roadmap as well. So here's a little bit about each of these audios that you can see on the slide. The first audio is titled The Healing Powers of the Mind. And even after this crushing setback from injury, as either a weekend warrior, a student athlete, or professional, you can emerge as an even stronger and better athlete on the other side of injury. In fact, the goal here is to make rehab your new sport until you get your real game back. And you do that by making each day count. So be an all-star at following your doctor's recommendations. And most importantly, utilize the gains in your understanding of mindset training and recovery in order to fuel the journey. In tips and tools for recovery, one of the things that I point out is most injured athletes, you could tell they're injured just by how they carry themselves. They hang their head, they drag their feet, and even if they don't have a cast on, something's wrong because they look defeated. And whether they're sitting in the classroom or the training room or wherever they happen to be. And it's important to remember, they have an injury, all of them is not injured, just that one body part. And so body language is big. And one key tip is to maintain confident, upbeat body language during the day so that you could get feelings of well-being infused into your body and mind. And that really helps with your mood, which helps with everything else. In the the third audio, Daily Rehab Mindset. This is a really cool audio because this is one that you could listen to every day to get in a good mood and frame of mind for everything that you're going to do that day. And one of the things that's one of the key components of this module, or this audio within this module, is gratitude. And gratitude is key in everything, but especially during rehab. And so it's important to stay focused on your breathing and the realization that you're a living, breathing human being with just so much potential. And so appreciate what you have, savor the good things in your recovery and in your life. And sure, things could be better, but they could also be a whole lot worse. So, look for things that, that you're thankful for, and not just what you're upset about. And then we have optimism is golden. And optimism, or always seeing the positive outcome, is critical for health and key for all athletes dealing with any kind of injury. So feel optimistic and in control of where your life is headed. Do the work and don't worry about the light at the end of the tunnel. You just want to know that it's coming. And so every day is one day closer if you do things the right way, mentally, and then in terms of the physical side, to getting your game back. And if you do those things, you will get that game back. And then finally, return to play. As we all know, a lot of times athletes are physically cleared to play, but mentally they're just not ready. They get too anxious, their confidence is taking a big hit. They start overthinking everything, and they're worried about getting re-injured. And so one tip within return to play is make sure to perform a mental dry run of your first competition back. And that's visualization. Mentally play out what you want to have happen, not what you're afraid might happen. The clearer you imagine your performance, being the athlete you want to be and playing the way you want to play, and the more times you rehearse this in your mind's eye, the greater the likelihood that the reality will match your imagination. So really use visualization to see yourself back on the field and playing. I think that's so important.
Well, great, thank you, Jim. And among the many coaches and athletes and others like athletic trainers and strength and conditioning coaches we talk to, one of the topics they frequently bring up when it comes to kind of the mental approach to recovery to injury and illness is thinking traps that they fall into along the way, whether that's right after the injury occurs, or it's maybe they think they're getting closer to a return to play, whether that's practice or competition or both, and then there's a setback and the member of the medical staff kind of has to change that timeline and delay their return. So could you tell us a little bit more about some of those thinking traps and maybe how to remedy some of those?
Yeah, that's absolutely true, Phil. Another name for thinking traps or errors is what we call cognitive distortions. And these occur anytime we start to see the world, ourselves, and other people as they are not. And if we get stuck in these distortions, and we all have them to some extent, they can start to negatively impact how we think, act, and perform. So let's look at a few of the most common ones. If you're hurt or injured or sick, it's easy to really start fixating on the problem and begin making it seem way bigger than it really is. And this is what's called magnification. That's the cognitive distortion. And the antidote to this is to realize that while your situation isn't ideal, it is only temporary, and you're taking the physical and mental steps to come back stronger. So that's important to keep in mind. Another cognitive distortion that could really take hold if you're ill or injured is discounting the positive. And what this means is, when you're injured or your illness seems like, it's the worst thing in the world, and you stop acknowledging anything that in your life or even in your rehab that could be counted as a positive. And here it might seem a bit counterintuitive to do, but you can imagine the worst thing that could have happened. And sometimes that helps to realize that, okay, this is bad, but not as bad as it could be. And then it gives you a sense that, that I could get through this. And so if you sprained your ankle, at least you didn't dislocate it or break any bones, for example. Or if you hurt your knee, at least it wasn't the whole joint explosion that, say, former NBA player Sean Livingston suffered early in his career. And then consider that even if it was, Livingston was still able to come back to be an important part of 2 championship teams with the Golden State Warriors. And so it can also be really helpful here to start a daily, on top of all this, to start a daily gratitude practice. And, we've all heard that, but it's really powerful when you actually do it. And that's just listing 3 things, it could be big or small things from your day, or just even people in your life or on your sports medicine team that you're really grateful for. And you could do that every evening, and it's really powerful. And it really helps with the recovery process. The issue that is often, cognitive distortions are blind spots, and we forget we're even making these thinking errors. And when we're out of our sport because we're hurt or sick, we can get into our heads too much and start to groove thinking patterns that are really counterproductive. And that's why there's an entire module in the Champions Mind course. And I think that's a really powerful complement to the recovery from injury module. And that both of these together can really help ensure that you come back mentally ready to play, as well as just being physically prepared.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Jim. Could you maybe share some do's and don'ts when it comes to recovery mindset that you often give athletes to help them improve their comeback experience and make sure, as you say, that they're coming back not just physically ready, but also mentally prepared?
Certainly, and these are just a few examples that we cover on the app, but let's go ahead and pair each do in terms of what to do with the corresponding don't, what to avoid. So first, reach out for support and don't let yourself become isolated. And we all kind of know that, but most of us could do a way better job at that. And so the point here is never suffer alone. If you're going through a rough patch in any area of your life, especially when dealing with an injury as an athlete, really reach out for support. It's there. That's why we have support. And it's important to take advantage of it. All those people in our life and, on our team and, definitely the sports medicine staff. Second, stay in your sport by working on your mental game every day. So as you and I talk about, Phil, you might have to leave the game physically. You don't have to leave the game mentally. And, one way to do that, as we've already discussed briefly, is through visualization. And so don't just check out of your sport until you return to play. Stay in the game mentally. And then when it's time physically to return to play, you're going to be a lot sharper than you would have been if your head had been elsewhere all that time. Third, reach out to teammates and coaches, for example, to get to know them better. Ask them how they're doing, check in with them, what's going well. And if there are any challenges, you could help them work through. So, cheer them on too. Even if you're not playing, it means a lot to them that you're rooting for them and you're there for them. And the don't here is don't tell yourself that they no longer want to talk to you because you aren't able to practice or play. And a lot of times we tell ourselves that, and that's why we isolate ourselves. So, be a positive force for your teammates and coaches. Fourth, make sure you're committing to the physical side of your rehab and making your comeback your new sport until you're fully healed. So don't be reckless, over adhere, and risk re-injury or getting sicker. On the flip side, don't become apathetic and do less than you're supposed to do, as it will then take you longer to come back. So again, the mistake a lot of athletes make is they either over adhere to the rehab and attempt to come back quicker, and then they hurt themselves even more sometimes, or they kind of just go through the motions, under adhere to their rehab exercises, and then they never get back. And then fifth, intentionally carve out, this is so important, at least 10 minutes a day to do something you find fun or relaxing. And, be creative, try something that you haven't tried before, or go back to an old hobby. Have something to look forward to each day is so important. And just because you can't play your sport doesn't mean that you don't deserve to treat yourself or find enjoyment in other areas of your life.
I love that. Well said, Jim. And how about from a coaching perspective? What are some things a coach or maybe even another member of the performance staff could do to help the mental side of an athlete's comeback?
Well, you make a great point there, Phil, that coaches shouldn't just be thinking about when a player will be back in action physically, but also pay attention to the mindset aspect of their recovery. And the first thing a coach can do is just keep checking in on a player who's sidelined, particularly when they're not able to join the team because of serious injury, or, let's say they have a virus like COVID-19. So even a quick text to ask, hey, how are you doing today? Is there anything I can do to help? Those kind of things really goes a long way because it shows the athlete that you care about them. And, if you're a college coach and the athlete is a long way from home, probably want to check in with them even more, but, maybe you could even drive them to their next PT appointment or, you know, if you can, maybe see them on campus at the training room, and you know, or maybe even encourage one of their teammates to do that. If you know they're going to have surgery, you being the first person to visit them afterward at the hospital, if that's possible, will really mean a lot to them, and you know, they'll go through a brick wall for you moving forward. And you could also provide some simple visualization exercises and encourage them to work hard on their mental game. So tell them that you know, expect them to make, you know, again, rehab their new sport, and their job is to get better, but it's also to get better by staying in the game mentally. And in a team setting, it'd be great if you sent out a group text or social media message to all your athletes and fellow coaches celebrating a big recovery milestone that they make, such as, you know, when an athlete can walk again without crutches. Let them know, you know, hey, congratulations on that, you know, that milestone that you just passed. And this will make them feel like they're still an important part of the team. A lot of times I've been around injured athletes, and you know, they reach one of those milestones and no one on their team even acknowledges it, and you know, or even knows about it. So it's important to be aware of that. And if you're at practice taking, you know, talking strategy, let's say for the next game, and the injured player is there, why not ask them what they think about a particular player situation? Get them involved in a different way, like you would, let's say, with one of your assistant coaches. And so anything you can do to keep the injured or ill player engaged and involved with the team and feeling a part of the team will be a total win-win from a mindset perspective, and then also a coach-player relationship perspective.
I love that. Thank you, Jim. Yeah, I remember when we were talking about this webinar and you mentioned that I think one athlete had said that they kind of feel like spoiled milk kind of pushed back in the fridge. Is that right? In terms of how sometimes players can feel left out and as if they're kind of that you know last cog or forgotten part of the team once they're out of sight and out of mind.
Yeah, it's a terrible feeling. I mean, I've heard, you know, spoiled milk. I've heard like, hey, I'm on the other side of the glass, and you know, and my team, you know, my whole team's on the other side of the glass, and then, you know, or just, you know, I feel invisible, you know, those kind of things. You know, it's a super cold world when you're injured. So, you know, that's again a part of a true team is everyone supporting everyone.
Oh, I love that. Thank you, Jim. I can see as you were talking that we had quite a few questions come in. Obviously, we're trying to keep this session fairly short and be respectful of everyone's time. And you wouldn't be able to answer everything in that much depth anyway because of the sheer number of questions. So what we're going to do is answer any questions that you might have for Jim in an upcoming blog post, or possibly if we get enough questions, a two-parter. So if you do have a question, please go ahead and fill that in that little GoToWebinar panel in the top right of your screen. If you have more than one question, go ahead and ask both or all three, and we'll do our best to have Jim get back to you with the written answer as soon as we're able. And yeah, thanks in advance for being engaged enough to ask questions, either about what you heard here today, or if there's anything you feel like we glossed over or missed. We'll sure do our best to answer that in that upcoming blog post. Jim, if it's okay, I'll turn it back to you to quickly recap some of the main points and takeaways from today's presentation.
Thanks, Phil. Here are some key takeaways, some reminders, some lessons to keep in mind. And again, these go a long way if you could make them a part of your recovery from injury, or you know, help the injured athlete while they're going through that recovery process. So one is, you know, really learn to love your comeback more than you hate the setback. I mean, there's more glory to be found by, you know, getting knocked down and then coming back and making something big happen. So write your comeback story, fall in love with it. Reframe your injury or illness as a chance to work on other things, you know, like your mental game, or you know, even, you know, flex your talents in other areas of your life. You know, return to some old hobbies, do some things that help you to feel good, like we talked about. Remember the comeback stories of Karoli Takush and Ed Moses, who both used injuries as a chance to adjust, adapt, and come back even stronger, and really reinvent themselves, and then do some pretty remarkable things that you know, probably would have seemed impossible, you know, or more like a movie than real life if it actually hadn't happened. Learn to recognize cognitive distortions. That's a big one. We're getting a lot of feedback on the app that's a lot of listeners find that as one of their favorite modules. And by doing that, we could avoid slipping into thinking traps that kind of keep us stuck and in a negative mood. The idea here is use your injury instead of letting it use you. Anything that comes your way, you got to find a way to turn it to your advantage, and that's one of the ways of doing it. Is what we're talking about here today in terms of your attitude. Stay committed and consistent to your comeback without going too far and risking re-injury. If you're an athlete, stay connected with your teammates and coaches, even if there's a big party that feels like isolating. Keep yourself in, really make an effort to stay connected. It makes a huge difference. As we talked about, keep yourself in the game mentally by getting in some mental reps with visualization. And the more you do visualization, the better you get at it. So don't worry if right off the bat it's hard to see yourself healing or being out there back on the field. And then, like I said just a moment ago, do something you find fun or relaxing every day. If you're a coach, keep your injured athletes involved and engaged and let them know you care about them. Again, just a simple little notes or, just little check-ins make all the difference to an injured athlete. And then, let's all maintain a gold medal mindset in everything we do, think, and say. That's, that should be our goal, not settling for silver, but trying to be the very best we can be, whether it's on the field, in the training room, or, classroom or other areas of life as well. So, we definitely want to keep thinking gold.
Oh, thank you, Jim. And thanks to you too, Lindsay. And thanks everyone for joining us today. We hope what you've learned here today will be helpful as you approach injury and illness in a new way. If you're an athlete and if you're a coach, that you're able to better support your athletes as they go along on their comeback journey. And really our goal at Champions Mind is to make your mental game into the biggest weapon, not just in your comeback, but in your sport and in everyday life as well. If you'd like to learn more from Jim, our Champions Mind course includes an entire injury recovery module, as Jim said, and also the cognitive distortions module, and others on thriving under pressure, mental health, and more. So if you're a coach who's been looking for consistent, structured, and accountable mental skills training for your team, please just shoot us an email at the address on the screen to learn more, which is just info@champsmind.com. And we'd also be more than happy to show you a demo and kind of run you through our coach's dashboard that you'd use to deliver the course to your athletes as well. Or if you're an individual athlete, you can unlock all of the sessions and the modules in the course by tapping GoPro in the account screen of the Champions Mind app. Jim, do you have any closing thoughts?
Well, I just want to echo what you said, Phil, and thank Lindsay, and thank everyone for listening in today. That was a lot of fun. It's a tough topic, but it's an important topic, and we had fun talking about it with you today. Look forward to answering your questions, and then there's so much on this topic that we will definitely be revisiting it. So be good to yourself out there. Have a gold medal worthy week for yourself, and again, thanks so much, and until next time, have a great rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.